In the last video in this series, which was titled Raiders of the Lost Ark, we installed PackShell, a unified shell capable of creating and extracting multiple archive file types. When using it, if you press to get help, you will see the following dialog. And that's not what we want. What we want to see is this. So, what is ST-Guide, and how do we go about installing and configuring it? ST-Guide is a hypertext system. It was based on the file format of the Amiga help program, so for once, thanks Amiga, and it contains many of the features that we expect in hypermedia. Text, links, images, and some more esoteric features like drawing lines, arrows, shapes. I mean, okay, these days we have SVG in the HTML canvas, but this was the late 80s. One feature of the hype file format that is different is that each page, a node in ST-Guide terminology, has the notion of a next and a previous page. So in addition to the traditional back button navigation and clicking links, we can click the next and previous buttons and you can read the hype file as if it was a single document or book. I'll cover off more of the features of ST-Guide as we configure and use it in this video, and probably in subsequent ones as well, because we're not going to cover everything today. So let's get started installing and configuring the app. Right, a tiny bit of admin first. In the last video we installed PackShell. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a link to that on the desktop because, like the QED editor, I think we're going to be using it frequently. Now, apologies, it seems to be National Drive Past David's House Day today. I don't know why there's like 30 vans a second going past where I live, but I'll try and get the noise out. So I'm going to copy the ST-Guide files from my GemD drive onto the temp folder in our C drive, and we're going to work from there. I could have left them on the D drive, but I just think my brain wasn't switched on when I was recording this. And then we're going to run PackShell and we'll decompress the Remarker application from the D drive onto our temp folder and C. Now, Remarker is a separate third-party app that allows you to annotate hype files. We'll get around to installing and configuring that in a bit. Now, as we extract Remarker, you can see that there is a hype file inside of it, so it uses ST-Guide to document itself, which is good. So I'm creating a folder in the root of the C drive called etc. And that's a folder that's just going to contain miscellaneous non-binary files ongoing, and help files are a perfect example of that. So I'm going to access the create folder dialog via the shortcut key Control-N. And we create etc. Now ST-Guide is a desktop accessory, so I'll move the config file for it into the root of the C drive because that's where accessories look. And the accessory itself into our AXE folder. Now the guides folder contains the ST-Guide help files. We'll move that into the etc folder, and that's where we'll put all future third-party help files, like the Remarker one. Now there are 3 command line utilities that we're going to be using, and we're going to move them into our command folder so they're on our path and can be executed from anywhere. These are HCP, which is the hypertext compiler used to convert ST-Guide source files in ASCII into compiled, compressed, indexed hype files. The reflink tool, which extracts references from all ref files in the guides folder and creates a master reference file, and still, which creates a tree-like representation of hype files based on the category attribute in the help file. It produces a catalog, which then can be used as the equivalent of an index.html. Okay, it's time to edit our configuration. Most of this is just to tell ST-Guide the locations of files and components that we have placed in non-default locations. And in our case, it's just about all of the paths that we're going to have to edit. So we're going to set the location to find hype files to c:/etc/guides. Now we're going to remove the A drive path as we don't want floppy seeks happening when we open the accessory or run the command line tools. So get rid of that. We need to tell ST-Guide that the compiler is in our command folder. We set the location of hypefind as our command folder. Now we don't have that tool installed yet, but we will do in the future. The ref setting tells ST-Guide and reflink where to create the all.ref file that is our master index. Def hype is the default hype file loaded at startup. When STGuide is opened manually, this will be the document that gets shown. We'll leave this as the default STGuide help file for now, but when we create our own help, potentially in the next episode, we'll modify that. Finally, we set the mark file location that specifies the file to save bookmarks to, and the rest of the settings we leave alone. And if you're shouting at the screen that I didn't edit the reflink setting, you're absolutely right. I'll fix that when I install the reflink tool. So after saving our settings and quitting QED, we reboot. And after reboot, we need to add STGuide to all the Xboot sets where we're going to use it, right? So I'm going to add it to productivity and to papyrus. Then I'm going to boot into our productivity set. And boom. Okay, so let's take a look around the STGuide app, and we'll concentrate mostly on the toolbar and what we can get from that. But just first to show that this is a general purpose hypertext system. So we can say, let's have a look at the function overview. So that leads in, let's go one more level. So let's go to lines, boxes, and types. And what this is going to do is we can start showing off some of the navigation features. So back goes back one, just like you would expect in a standard hypertext system, like your web browser. This gives you a stack of your recent navigation. I think it holds about 12. But what that allows you to do is very quickly leapfrog back up your set of hyperlinks, say to the root in our case. And this functionality is very much what you get in modern web browsers, where if you press and hold on the back button, it'll give you a list of all the links that you navigated to get to where you are. Next, we have the button that shows you your bookmarks. We don't have any, so I think that says undefined. I don't speak German. Next, we have this set of buttons, which is very interesting. I mentioned this earlier in this video, that these documents aren't just hyperlinked, they're also structured with forwards and backs. So this button will take you up a level, this button will take you to the previous document at this level, and that one will take you to the next document at that level. So if you look at the following diagram, imagine you've got your main page. Underneath that, you've got C1, C2, and C3. And under C3, you've got C4 and C5. So imagine we were on page C2. If we press the back button, we would end up on page C1. The next button, we would end up on C2. And if we hit the up button, I mean, this looks like a home button, but it's not. It's actually an up arrow that would take you from C2 to the main page. Equally, if we were on node C4, there would be no back button because there's nothing to the left. The right button would take you to C5, and the home button would take you up a level to C3. So slightly different to conventional hypertext, but actually really useful if you just want to consume content as a linear document. Now, the next button here is the index. The index is the available hyperlinks within a given document. So it's not across documents, it's within a document. This is interesting because when you compile a hypertext file, you get two files, the .hype, which is the actual page itself, and a .ref, which contains all of the references, the links inside of the document. And this page here is formed from the .ref file. Next, we have the catalog. Catalog is a master page that points to all of the pages within your document. We don't have one at the moment. If we click on that, we'll get an error. We're going to create that in about 3 or 4 minutes. Now, this button, which is the See Also, if a page declares specific references to external files, that's where they'll appear. So let's just navigate right quick back up to the STGuide documentation. And if we go See Also, it'll give us a list of interesting separate help files to look at. If we have the help file, do here, it will open it. However, if we don't have the help file, you'll get an error. Let's look at this. Let's have a look at, we don't have any documentation on the first conv converter. And when we click on it, we'll just get an error like that. Okay. Next, we have a help page. So each hypertext file can define a help page. That help page is specific to it. So here it's saying this is the help file for STGuide. If I now go to another file, I'm going to pick the HCP tool file. this. If I select its help file, now it looks a lot like the previous one, but that's because they're written by the same guy. But it says this is part of the documentation for the HCP compiler and describes its features. So that is a help file for a hype file. I gives you information on the application, who wrote it, where to send money to, and it tells you the file name that you're looking at, the topic, and the author. I do wish it gave you the category, but it doesn't, which is unfortunate. Now this icon, that looks to me like a save icon, is actually a load icon. And that allows you to load any hype file located anywhere on your drive. And finally, we come to the extras menu. So this is just stuff. So we have find. I'm not going to cover that yet because we still need some tooling in place to make that work properly. Now, erase stack is interesting. If you look at the second item in the toolbar, that has our history. If we erase the stack, it's gone, so it's disabled. You can copy and paste text. You can print a page, should you be one of the 2 people in the universe who can get a printer to work with an ST these days. You can run the remarker tool, which again, we've mentioned this before, we haven't installed it yet. And you can select the font to display things in. And if you select this, you're just going to get an error saying there's no font selector installed. We will need to install a font selector at some point in either this video or the next video. That is a whistle-stop tour of the ST Guide tool and how it works. Now I want to fix up a few of the issues that we've seen. In particular, I want to create a category so that we can navigate all of our help files from a single location. Right, I'm just going to rearrange my desktop just a little bit because I want to put my NeoAuto.bat on the desktop because we're going to use that quite a bit. There's a lot of command line usage required to get this thing running, so it's just handy to have that on the desktop. We're getting to the point, actually, that we have 3 things on the desktop there now. Should we start adding more, and I presume we will be doing that over time, then we're going to want some kind of a taskbar or a task selector, which will run on the desktop. We'll see. Let's go into the shell. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go into our guides folder. We want to create our catalog file. And I just previously said it was a category file, but that's because I'm an idiot. Right. So the file that we run to use, that is called stool. Stool is in our command folder. So it will be available on our command line interface from the guides folder because we've set our path to command. Right, let's run stool. And stool runs on hype files. Right, it says it's searching for hypertext files. It's found them. It's worth noticing at this point, it's saying that the config file catalog.conf is not found. We will be creating one of those as part of this process in a little while, but for now we're going to run without it. It's created the catalog. It's a 2-pass process, compression of 428 bytes. No idea what that means, but compression is always good. Let's go back into ST Guide. Notice I haven't rebooted, I haven't restarted. It tends to just pick this stuff up. So now if I go to the catalog button, we have a catalog. Now the catalog is a set of links to hypertext documents. Now it is a hierarchy of documents or an ontology or whatever you want to call it. And it is created via the ST tool using attributes of each individual hype files. In particular, there's an attribute called @subject, and the subject attribute tells it where it should go. So in this case, documentation ST Guide gives us a list of documentation for ST Guide. So then once we get down to this level, we can then just click on the individual links for individual hype files, and now everything is discoverable. Now at the moment, we only have the hypertext files for ST Guide in there. So let's see what happens when we put in some more. So I'm just going to open up the guides folder here. And then it comes with documentation already. That is our pack shell will come with it. Let's go pack shell. Let's pick up the hype file and pick up the ref file because we know that we need those references to build indexes. And then our editor QED come with it. Does be that long. Okay, so now we have 2 extra ones. It's worth saying, actually, that there was more than just documentation for application. If I can get hold of it, I used to have a copy of the 68,000 assembly guide in SD guide format, which is very useful when you're programming. So I'm going to run the still command again. Let's just rebuild our catalog. And in the CLI, by the way, I'm pressing Shift and up to access the history buffer in the CLI, and so I don't have to keep typing the same command every time. And there we go. Right, so once this is load into the accessory again, we don't have to restart or anything. We go back to the top level. So now we have the SD guide set of documents and a node called editors. Under editors, we have QED. We go into QED. We have that. What I'm not seeing right. So now we have documentation with a C, documentation with a K, a Germanic documentation. And in that documentation, we have shells, and then we have the documentation for pack shell. Obviously, this is going to be in German, I guess. However, let's just think about what we saw there. So the subject that creates the categorization is in the document. And if documentation is spelled differently in both of them, you're going to end up with 2. This is not ideal. What we want to do is we want to have a way of overriding what the document says the categorization should be and telling it where we want it to go. Now, to do that, you need to create a catalog configuration file in type files are and run the still tool. Again, let's do that. At the start, I want to show you actually what the result of just creating a blank config file is. I'm going to spin up QED, get the usual error message about it not being able to clipboard folder. I will go check if there's been a recent update to that, but there wasn't the last time I checked. Okay, now we want to go into QED, file, new text, and then we're just going to do save as, and we put that into our etc folder, if I can find it, into guides, and we're going to call it catalog, correct, catalog.cfg. We're going to save it. So it's blank, okay? Let's see what happens when we run our ST guide. Close that, pull this to the front. I'm going to run still. I've been running still with star.hype. You don't really need to do that. Just do still on its own. So let's try that. Do the same thing. It's found our files. Then its passes. And here we go. Let's have a look to see what that effect that has. So we've got our ST guide, and we'll go straight to the catalog. Now notice everything now is at the top level. So you can actually find every single thing that we've put in here in one page. You might say, let's go for it. But one, I want to add a bit more structure, but 2, it's interesting because when you read the documentation of ST guide, it's supposed to be exactly the same as running the tool and the command line, but it's not. It's overridden the default with some changes. And I'll explain what those changes are. So the changes are that it has decided to remove empty categorizations. So if you have a mid and then a bottom, and the bottom has one file in it, it will then move that file into the mid categorization and delete the lower one. And then it also has an ability to squash things. So what it does then is it really aggressively moves stuff up the hierarchy, then reprocesses and reprocesses and reprocesses to the point where, as in this case, everything is actually percolated to the top. I mean, that's okay, because actually as a baseline, that's not bad, because what we're saying is start with everything uncategorized, and then we're going to override what it would do by default. We're going to do that. We're going to add some entries to our config file. I'm just going to quickly do that, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I have made some edits, and let me show you what they are. Let's go into our config file, which is there. Just drop that E. So in this config file, you have switches, and then you have statements which recategorize things. So switches are enabled and disabled by putting a plus if you want to enable it, a minus if you want to disable it, and then the name of the switch. I'm enabling create, which says, okay, if this file doesn't contain a definition for the categorization of a hype file, use the one that comes with it. If it doesn't have one, it'll put it into an others category at some point in the tree that it sees fit. And what you tend to have to do with this is just iterate. You create the config file, you run stool, you go in, you look at how it's put stuff in, you then make changes to decide how to do things. Shrink is the thing that gets rid of empty categories, and pull up is the thing that says if there's only one child in the directory below, effectively pull it up one. Then after that, there are a series of instructions saying for this hype file, so the dot means process a hype file, and then after it is the name of the hype file, and then you tell it the categorization you want to give it. I'm saying for ST guide, put it into documentation ST guide, same with HCP, reflink, and stool, and remarker 2. And then for pack shell, put it in documentation shell. So we should have now, because pack shell was in the documentation with a K, we will have one top level documentation node with a load of stuff underneath it. So I'm just going to save that. Let's run our command line tool. Just pull that away. Stool. Starting to take a little bit of time now. It's doing some work. Right. Sorry. If we go to ST guide, pull up our categorization. Now we have ST guide, which contains our documentation for stool, HCP, reflink, and ST guide. And we have shells, which contains just pack shell, and then editors, which contains QED. Let's just again compare that against our definition file. We have documentation for ST guide, documentation for shells, and line I didn't show you before, which is, where's my editors gone? Ah, no, okay, so that's interesting. So I hadn't specified an entry for QED, but because QED's default folder is documentation editors, the create option, put it into the right place. Cool. There was method in my madness after all. So I'm just going to quit out of that. So what have we got left to do here today? We've got our categorization, got our index. If we just quickly look at find, I'm going to say as a reference, because I can't do that. That's what we've got to do. We have no all.ref file. So let's create that. We're going to say reflink right. So now we should have a file here called all.ref. Right, there it is. Right, so now we've got our all.ref file, which has been created for us by our ref tool. Let's see how that manifests itself in the program. So if we go into ST guide, so I'm on this page called pull up, which is somewhere in the S tool hierarchy. I'm going to go in and let's have a look at the couple of finds that we can run here. So the first thing is we can search for something within the page. So if I go search for the word topic and go search in page, it's found the word topic there. Now I can press Control G and it should go to the next topic, which is somewhere here, because here's the thing. Oh, that's there. It doesn't highlight it. All you know is somewhere on that line and there's going to be the word topic, but it's better than nothing, I guess. So what else could we search for? Well, we could try and search a little broader. So let's try and search for create page, and it's gone straight to it. And we could search within it. Now, finally, we want to use our all.ref file. So let's do a search as a reference. So if I say, okay, I know I'm going to have a reference to say the HCP program. Say search for that as a reference. It told me it's found a hit for HCP in main HCP, and that's an HCP in the HCP documentation category. And if we double click on that, off we go. Search as it stands at the moment with the configuration that we've got is not very good. We really want to be able to search for text across all pages. But at the moment, we haven't configured the, what was it called? Was it called something like hyperfind? The one that was in the config file that I mentioned we wouldn't get around to doing probably today. But we will definitely get around to doing that in the next video. We've achieved quite a bit in this video so far, and I think it's about time to call a halt because I don't like videos that go on too long. I'm going to do a part 2 of this. So today we've installed ST Guide, which means we set up our file system. We created etc. We moved things into bin files, into the guide files. We got everything up. We edited the inf file for the ST Guide accessory, and we got it all up and running. So then we ran stool, which created our catalog file. We decided that wasn't what we wanted. We created our config file for stool, and we created our own categorization. We ran the reflink tool to create an all.ref, which then allowed us to use the find functionality, which then we could find links to pages. From where we were to where we've gotten to, we've got quite a major increase in functionality for our system. Now, next video, I'm going to look at hyperfind, so we can actually search across all these pages. Remarker, so we can annotate our pages, and maybe some third-party docs. But the other thing I want to look at and show you is how you actually create a hype file and how you compile it and get it into your system. So I have it in mind that what I'm going to do is I'm going to use ST Guide to keep a sort of a change log for this particular image that I've got, which will, on a video by video basis, outline what was added to it, how things were changed, etc. And then in not too long a time, when I get to the point where I'm going to start zipping this hard drive image up and putting it online and allowing you guys to download it and play with it, you'll have a reference to tell you what's changed since the last time you did it. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.